So my name is Nelson. I am senior at the Honors College and I study biology. That's my first major and a minor in chemistry. And my focus of research right now is neuroscience. So I work with everything has to do with neurons and neuron connections, and specifically I work with fruit flies. So they're super interesting and they resemble us a lot, which is really surprising. So yeah, that's what I do.
What inspired your thesis?
So my thesis was inspired by my mentor, my current mentor. She is a postdoctoral fellow at my lab. She works with diseases like Alzheimer's disease and ALS. There is also all the neurodegenerative diseases that are like super important to study. She finds different genes that kind of target those diseases, and then she's trying to find like cures of those diseases through those genes. So I was super inspired by her project, and I kind of branched off of what she's actually doing just by thinking of my own questions, and then my thesis was created. Yeah.
What are the short and long-term goals of this project?
So for short term, my project is to find different genes that could regulate different synapses when two neurons are connecting. And these genes are specifically expressed in some cell that we call astrocyte. And these cells are around the synapses and they're helping the neurons connect. And astrocytes are regulating all this information. So my short-term goal is to find those genes that astrocytes have that are helping synapses. And then as a long-term goal is to use those genes eventually for gene therapies, and then be able to cure different diseases just by manipulating them.
Could you explain your thesis in a way even a child could understand?
That would be very hard, but I think that a way of explaining my thesis very simply is that our brain has a lot of neurons. Everybody knows that brains just have a lot of neurons, and neurons are connecting with each other. But not many people know that that's not all the story. There's other things. There's helpers of these neurons that are helping them to connect. And these helpers are sometimes understudied. So what I'm doing is trying to understand what the role of these helpers are and how we can potentially use these helpers to fix problems that neurons have.
What are the similarities between the brains of fruit flies and the human brain?
So that is a really good question. A lot of people would be like, flies and people, that doesn't seem like they're similar, but they're surprisingly similar. So people back in the 60s, they figured out the genome of the fly, and then they compared that to some of human genes, and they realized that the fly has a lot of genes that are very similar to humans. So maybe we don't really look the same. Physically, flies can fly, and of course we can't, unless we use an airplane, right? But there are a lot of physiological differences, but that doesn't mean that what's in the inside is different. So just like every human, just like mice, just like monkeys, for example, flies also have to develop their brain. Flies also are born from their mothers and their fathers, so we have this genomic similarities on how we set up organs, how cells communicate with each other. So that's why we use flies, and they're so similar to us.
If you can prove your thesis, could it help cure certain diseases?
So it wouldn't cure diseases like right away, but it would definitely give us an edge on what's going on with different diseases. So for example, there's so many proteins that I'm investigating, and if one of those proteins happens to be like super important to regulate a synapse, then we can look further into like mice, for example, and the vertebrate, and then we can maybe apply that to humans eventually for like drug treatments. So we can use the same proteins that maybe when someone has Alzheimer's, this gene turned off and died, and then if you inject the gene again through different gene therapies, maybe that person will be able to have that protein again, and will be able to have normal synapses, which will cure them. So that's the whole logic behind why we do these genetic studies. It's because if you can manipulate them, you can potentially cure a lot of different diseases without actually having to like chop someone's arm off or just like doing surgery on people or adding drugs on people. You can just do it in a more natural way. That is to cure, like heal the body itself.
Thanks so much for meeting with us.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for inviting me. And if you happen to have any question about neuroscience or how did I get involved in research or anything, you just see me around campus. People can just stop me by and say, hey, I'm just interested in what you do, and I'll be happy to answer.